Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to be interviewing you and sharing more of your story. So thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Um, yeah, to start off, we know a little bit more, or we know a little bit about you in the sense that, you started your career as a waitress at Hooters, became one of the first people to help open their Australian franchise at 19, and then became VP at 26, overseeing, I think, $800 million in revenue, I saw. And I'd love to hear just more about, from your own words, more about your background and kind of your early career to date.
Yeah, I mean that was the headline that you covered, and there's in between. But I'm the child of a single parent, an alcoholic father. Helped raise my sisters. Started working very young. That work included malls and retail, and cleaning gym equipment, and working in a restaurant, which happened to be Hooters, as a hostess. And then I became a waitress while I was still in high school. Dropped the other jobs because I was making much more in that job than the others combined, and got into college. First person in my family to get into college, planned to finish my engineering degree and then go on to law school. But the company was growing, Hooters was growing, and I had a ton of opportunities in the restaurant where I worked in Jacksonville and at other nearby restaurants that allowed me more hours, career development experiences. And through that, I got on the radar of management as someone that could help open new restaurants. And since the company was growing around the world, uh, I ended up getting to start opening franchises. And that started at the age of 19. But every few months, I was in a different country or a different state opening the locations. At first, I started out as a member of the team. Of course, I was very new to openings, and very quickly I became the leader of the teams at openings. And then very quickly I was failing college because I was traveling so much. So I dropped out of college at 19, just before I turned 20, and took a corporate job at the headquarters in Atlanta. And so moved to Atlanta when I was 20 and started moving up in that company as the company grew. And you can fast forward through what you just described over a number of years, in total 14 years. And every few years, the company was different. I was in a different role, and it was an incredible opportunity. Then I left and became president of Cinnabon at the age of 31. Somewhere in there, I went back to college to get my master's without a bachelor's. Nights, weekends, took 2 years. Graduated after I started as president of Cinnabon, helped turn around that brand just on the tail end of the Great Recession. Really leaned into building not only franchise excellence and operating excellence, but leaning into a multi-channel business strategy where the famous product, a version of it, or products inspired by it ended up in grocery and other types of retail. And this idea of being multi-channel or omni-channel successfully as a restaurant brand was very novel then. This was 2010, 2011. And it became a strategy for the parent company. So I moved into a group president role, helped bring this multi-channel thing to the other brands that we owned and acquired. And then a few years after that, became president and COO of the parent company of Focus Brands, which was 8 brands, 8.5 if you include Seattle's Best International. Starbucks owned them domestically. We had the license rights to international. So 8.5 brands, 9 presidents reported to me. So 7 of the core brands, plus a head of international, plus a head of licensing who succeeded me from that multi-channel team that I created, and was in that role for many years. So all in at Focus Brands for 10 years. Took a year off to advise, invest. I'd been an angel investor for a decade and wanted to put more energy into it while I took a break from operating, since it had been going on since I was so young. And within that window of helping other people, advising and investing, one of the companies that reached out to me to be an advisor was Athletic Greens, Chris Ashenden, the founder. That's how I met him. I was already a customer of AG, at the time called Athletic Greens, now AG1. And so I love the product, but I didn't know much about the company at all, and started advising him. And then over a number of months, that turned into what was very clearly an exciting and once in a lifetime opportunity. So I joined as president, COO, and member of the board of directors in November of 21, and have been in that role ever since. And we are building the world's greatest foundational nutrition company. Very simple, comprehensive foundational nutrition product that really helps people take ownership of their health. And it's a fascinating business with one product sold in one channel, only on drinkag1.com. But we do this one thing that's very, very complicated and hard to do well at scale and protect the taste and protect the quality. And it's amazing. So that's been the
Wow.
journey.
I'm impressed. That was the most amazing, eloquently said elevator pitch of what's a very thorough career. I'm inspired by that. I guess jumping all the way back to the beginning, I'm in awe of just even your boldness and willingness to drop out of college, especially since you mentioned you were the first one in your family to ever even get into a college. And I could imagine there's some kind of risk aversion that a lot of folks would have in your position. I'm curious about, obviously we know it worked out incredibly well, but back then, was there any doubt in your mind about dropping out, or was that something that you kind of knew just given the growth of
No,
Hooters at the time?
there wasn't a doubt. My only moment of pause was talking to my mom, who was so proud that I was going to college. And she had worked so hard when we left. My dad worked 3 jobs, fed us on a food budget of $10 a week for 3 years. And so I knew there was a version of how she interpreted that choice that would be disappointing. But she also knew I was doing something very cool and interesting, and I was fired up by all the travel. And so she was disappointed. She let me know she was disappointed, but said she was very happy that I seemed to be enjoying what I'm doing, and was generally supportive and encouraging. But otherwise, it wasn't even a pause other than that, or a choice or a debate for me. I was having so much impact and so much fun. And it was very clear that even being newer with these responsibilities and less experienced, there was a natural fit between the needs of the work that I was doing and my style and my interests. And so I wanted to lean into that and feed it. And I actually dropped out of college before I had any thought or guarantee or offer of a full-time salaried
Wow.
job.
Hmm.
I just thought more of the openings would continue and then I would figure it out. And it just so happened that they were expanding the training team. And a few months after I dropped out of school, I got a phone call being asked to interview for a role called employee training coordinator. So to basically help coordinate many of the activities that I was participating in, but across the company. And I was hired for that role. So to me, it didn't feel bold. It didn't feel risky. I was already doing it. I was doing it well. And I had no guarantee. I had no salary. I had no contract. Everything was hourly, but I had a deep belief that more was coming and that more of that opportunity would exist. So it was just a more
Interesting.
compelling alternative than what I had.
Yeah. I guess so. My next question, actually, I'm curious if this relates to that, but I think something that stands out about your career to me is that you're really loyal to the companies that you join. You weren't there just for a couple of years, which, frankly, in this modern day, it's very common for people to kind of jump ship every 2 or 3 years, and that's totally normal. I'm curious about your reason or desire to kind of stay for 10 years. Do you attribute that to the company, your personal style, or yeah, what do you make of that?
It's interesting. Those companies, at least in my experience, and not all companies are created equally or even similarly. Both of those companies in the decade, or in one case decade plus I was with them, were in hyper growth mode. I mean, they were, at least relative to their industries. And
Mm.
so we were constantly acquiring brands at Focus Brands and then growing the brands we had and then branching into new channels. And so if you think about that time, while I was at Hooters for 14 years, if you add the jobs together that I had, I was in a different role probably an average of every 18 to 20 months.
Oh, wow.
And that's because the company was growing.
Yeah.
And I was excited and qualified, or at least connected to the opportunities that came
Mm.
because of that growth.
Hmm.
So a lot of people have to leave a company because the opportunity they're looking for is somewhere else. In those companies, the opportunity that not even that I was looking for, that was the next step, was right in front of me in that company.
Oh,
And
wow.
the companies get the credit because they saw the potential in an internal candidate. I also share the credit for the quality of work I was doing, the relationships that I built, and my willingness to be uncomfortable and new in a company where now people know you. It's easy to be new and ask lots of questions and make mistakes
Yeah.
when you know you. But when you have to keep doing that
Yeah.
over and over, it takes a certain personality to start over with day one energy and not just come in with, I drank the Kool Aid. Like part of the benefit of bringing in someone from the outside is they have a fresh perspective. They see everything clearly. They don't have baggage from what the company decided to do a year ago. And I developed the skill of being able to get as close as possible to outsider energy every time
Mhm.
I started a new role. So it was good for the company in that way. But it also felt that energizing, like leaving the company. The companies, because they were growing quickly, changed a lot. They changed in size, in scale, in structure, in channel. And so I remember when I was hired as the president of Cinnabon, the partner in the private equity firm that had previously been the CEO that was interviewing me, he said, I think you have such high potential. I think you're going to be off to something bigger and better in 2 years. Just come here, help
Oh,
us clean
wow.
up. And I remember saying to him 2 years later, I am off to something bigger and better. It's just here. It just happened here. The company that we turned around was now bigger and better. The channels we got into were different. I probably wouldn't have been hired by a big CPG company after having been the president of Cinnabon, but I was able to lead CPG at Focus Brands because of the bridge of our brands. And so there's this real advantage if it makes sense for you in the company, because the reality is you probably get opportunities you wouldn't get externally if
Right.
it's a high growth company. So it's both, right? The companies were high growth, and that meant there was a lot of opportunity, so much growth that they couldn't reasonably fill all those positions from the outside, even if they wanted to. And that gave me much more opportunity. But it also meant I had to be ready or be seen as high potential or qualified in order to be the best person for that role.
Interesting. I'm curious, is there anything tactically that you did? I told, it's very gracious of you to kind of give credit that the company was able to recognize your talent, but I'm sure besides being a high performer, you also put yourself in kind of the right positions to be recognized and have your work recognized. Is there anything that you would advise people who are in a similar position to do?
I mean, people often think that, but it is rare, especially when someone is very early in their career, that things are as strategic as they look. I didn't have a plan. I didn't think I'm going to be the president of a brand like Cinnabon one day, and therefore I need to be here at 20 and here at 22 and here at 25. I really applaud people who are that thoughtful and strategic. And I advise a lot of folks who enjoy that to vision where they want to be and then reverse engineer the capabilities and experiences they should have. That just is not my style, and it's not what I did. I can do that in business strategy. I can do that with initiative planning, but it's not how I treated my career. I was far more um, impact driven and opportunistic. So it was about doing the best work and doing that plus one thing, whatever it was. So if a report was due, it was a report plus some other piece of information. Or if there was an event, it was an event plus I did this on top that made it special and memorable and high impact. And I just didn't have a lot of the worries that some people have about how I'd be viewed if I asked questions, or maybe it was because I was so young to the extreme that I thought, of course I have questions. And so I was very comfortable asking questions, which allowed me to be in a room with more humble confidence. I mean, obviously, if I'm asking questions, I'm comfortable in my own skin. But I also don't think I know everything because I'm asking questions. And so there was this humble confidence theme throughout. And I often talk about these four mindsets that I believe successful people have, which is humility, curiosity, courage, and confidence. And it's having command over those mindsets or skills or characteristics and knowing when to turn them up or down, depending on the scenario. And because I led so many people, so many teams in different countries, in different scenarios, usually leading teams I had never met, I had both the pain and the privilege of a lot of leadership development at a very young age, and including my family and my sisters. And so not only was I amassing skills, but I was becoming a very good leader of people and manager of processes from a young age. And often that's where some people get stuck, is they're really good at something, but they haven't gotten practiced at leading and building a team and holding them accountable and developing people. And I just got a really early start doing those things. And again, that's often what holds people back. So a leader in a company might see someone who's incredibly talented, but then they're like, but they've never led people, and I just don't know if this is the right team. I want to have somebody who's practicing leadership for the first time. And so because I had high and early development of both technical skills in restaurants, in consumer, in retail, in operations, and a very early start in leading teams, it's not as if the company was having to make this big compromise, to promote me internally. I was as qualified or more as some people from the outside, even if I didn't have the time in seat. I still had in that title, but I had the reps of the
Right.
activities.
Super interesting. Switching gears a little bit, I think something that I found really interesting in interviews that I've read or in your own writings is that in your bio, obviously, in addition to all of the things that you shared, it seems like you describe yourself as a creator as well. And you spend a lot of time, obviously, writing and publishing. And the way we connected over Twitter, for example, was how I kind of learned more about your career. And I love that because I feel like one of the things that I feel strongly about is that I wish there were more, business, science role models in the world. And I think a big reason there isn't is because execs tend to be really busy and don't invest in kind of creating content or building public presences. And I really admire that you've invested the time to do that. I'm kind of curious, like where that comes from, and around being a creator, what gets you the most excited?
I haven't had as much time since I joined AG.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You take a look, there's been a lot less in the last 2 years. Um, Maybe it goes back to I was just an early adopter of social media, which was a reflection of my generation, but it was unique for my level of responsibility.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
I was a vice president at 26 at Hooters and started leaning into, at the time, what was Twitter and Facebook for management recruiting, for interacting with customers. There were no executives doing that, especially not in the restaurant
Right.
industry. But
Yeah.
it happened to be because I was like 20 years junior to my peers. So I think there was a little bit of just generational luck, and that I was more native to social media than my peers. And then, of course, fast forward a few years when I'm a president of a business, I'm now 4 or 5 years deep into social media, which is, of course, the OG platform, the roots of the influencer or creator economy, because it created this distribution platform for people as a brand, for content. Um, and so, again, I was native to it. I was early and came by that authentically. So, when you compare, as many people ask the question that you do, like this is just unusual for people who are CEOs or presidents or whatever. It is, or it was at the time for many years, but it was in part a generational difference. And so my comfort with platforms, my respect for the power of the connective tissue and community was definitely a set of foundational layers
Mm.
for believing in content as commerce, people as brands. And while I never wanted to go all the way there, because certainly I was leading such large businesses that I didn't want the owners or the employees or the stakeholders to wonder what my priorities were.
Right.
Am I thinking more about my Twitter feed or the franchises? I
Mm.
could never let that be in question. So I was very thoughtful to
Mm.
stop short of anything that could look like someone's not sure,
Mm.
what's my gig. It was always clear. I'm a
Right.
business person who happens to engage on Instagram. I'm a business person who happens to hold rooms on Clubhouse. I'm a business person who happens to engage on Twitter. And I've always maintained that very clear distinction for my own reasons. There are
Right.
others who are great business people, entrepreneurs, and they are equally creators and monetizing that brand and building followings. And I've just stayed on the other side where
Mm.
business I run is my priority and everything else is secondary or enabling in that way.
Right.
Place for me to connect with customers, a place for me to be found and approachable if a customer or a candidate for an open role wants to find me or a press opportunity, I am very easy to find, right? I don't have layers of people around
Mm,
me. And so because of that, we also got a lot of opportunities as a brand in all of my brands that I've run because someone from the
mm,
press could just reach out to me or a
right.
candidate who's interested in the company would just DM me and then I'd forward it to HR like, oh, I got this great candidate in my DMs. And they're like, what? Um, so it wasn't just about being out there and
Right.
projecting. It was more for me about being accessible
Interesting.
in the broadest way.
Interesting. Do you still feel like that advantage exists today? Like to your point, I think it sounded like you got a huge head start because you're kind of very unique for the level that you had at a relatively young age. Do you still think there's that kind of arbitrage opportunity for, up and coming execs or founders or leaders?
Yeah, I just think now you've got to be far more niche, clear, consistent. It's less like I'm speaking and I'm just here and therefore there's a benefit because
Mhm.
everybody's speaking and everybody's
Right.
there now. And
Fair enough.
so you've got to be a bit more targeted in what your message, your platform, the consistency with which you post, with which you engage, right? All of that matters. Otherwise you just get lost in the
Right.
sea of content.
That makes sense. So switching gears a little bit to talk about Athletic Greens AG1, I'm curious about you. You kind of had talked about how you got introduced to that journey, but I imagine that decision wasn't as easy as just deciding one day to join, especially given your background. I'm sure going from kind of these large incumbent, very well-known brands to kind of a high-growth startup was daunting, at least in some ways. I'm really curious about kind of that decision-making process, both the things that you were really excited about, and then also the things that you were worried about and wanted to diligence more before joining.
I mean, one piece of the decision was that I had kind of a 6 month interview or relationship building process because I was an advisor.
Mm,
And that solves for a lot of concerns if one has them, right? Because we're working
true.
together for a long period of time. We're getting to know each other. We're getting to see how we react to good times, bad times. How do our styles gauge, meaning me and the founder and CEO. And so that makes a big difference. It wasn't like, oh man, I have this opportunity and I'm making a cold jump across a chasm.
Mm,
It's this is a relationship and an opportunity and a company that I've been getting to know. And I really understand what's inside the company. I understand the financial performance. I understand the team and what I'm going to be dealing with. It was totally de-risked in my mind. It looks super risky from the outside. People are like, whoa, you jumped to this startup, high growth, D2C, and you'd never done that. I had 6 months to
yeah.
figure and Chris and the team had 6 months to work with me and see, because it's a risk for them too, bringing in a
Mm,
big company person who may not respect the founder journey, the simplicity of the model. You could argue it's a risk on all sides, but Chris and I both felt it was the most de-risked decision, we could possibly make. So that I think you can't remove that from the equation. Not everyone has that opportunity, but if you do, it's really interesting. But even prior to that, because it wasn't just that we got to work together and then it was like, oh, this is a good idea. There were several things that led me to this point where that was the most obvious, amazing opportunity. One, I've been an angel investor in early stage businesses for over a decade. I am not new to the founder game, the venture capital world, to the problems of early stage businesses. And some chunk of my portfolio of investments is e-commerce and D2C. So that doesn't mean I know how to run it. It just means I had some exposure, some familiarity, some respect.
right.
And that certainly helps de risk for the company someone with very different experiences coming in. It also helps allow me to be more effective. Then there is my own personal health and wellness journey. Just over the years, I became more interested, obsessed, personally committed to nutrition and health and wellness. And while I ran Cinnabon and worked at Hooters and all other things, there were a lot of other brands at Focus Brands where I was able to marshal far more healthy choices into the menu, whether it was at Moe's or McAllister's or Schlotzskys or even Jamba Juice when we bought that brand and it was full of sugary smoothies and we slashed the sugar and brought in plant-based options. I mean, I was really able to work that muscle in ways most will never appreciate. That's not obvious because you just go Hooters, Cinnabon, Athletic Greens. How does that
Right.
make sense? But there's so much more in between there that is evidence
Mm,
of my passion around health, wellness, and nutrition. And personally, because I'm a mom of two kids and I want to live long and strong. And my mom is a breast cancer survivor and want to stack the odds in my favor. And so I come by this commitment very honestly. And so, of course, when something becomes a bigger and bigger part of your personal life, it's ideal if it matches up with or is reflected in the work you're doing. And while I had made um, very powerful changes at Focus Brands and the brands that I mentioned and the way that I described, it was still not enough. It was like I made things that could have been worse better. And I made things that were good better. But to have the opportunity to be a part of something that wasn't just better for you or fun for you, but actually healthy for you.
right.
Um, and so simple and so modern was an unbelievable, that those charts you see ikigai where you have the circles that overlap of your passion, your capabilities, your income potential, like where, and then you look for the Venn diagram for the overlap of those. And that was this for me. And the other piece is I'm on the board of directors of two founder CEO led venture backed companies that have been around for
Mm,
over a decade, Milk Bar and Slice. And so that's the situation I'm in with AG, founder CEO led over a decade, now 13 years. Um, and so there was also some prep and familiarity there that, back to your question, when you understand these things, that these things were happening in the background for me for
right.
years, it makes the move to AG so obvious. But if you just looked at the LinkedIn profile, it does not seem so obvious. It looks like a huge gamble. But it was actually the most like slowly built opportunity that was de-risked through both that I was a customer, so I didn't have to be sold on the, like I was a deep believer, like chief fangirl,
Right.
and had that advisory opportunity. So it is not as risky or wild as it looks.
Fair enough. I'm curious for, seasoned execs like yourself who didn't have all of that exposure kind of organically or through innate interest and passion to startups who might otherwise feel that culture shock. I'm curious if there are like, two or three things that come to mind that, say you were onboarding a new exec who has never had exposure to AG1 today. What are like the three things that you would expose them to immediately or, bring to their attention before they join just to make sure they weren't shocked when they joined the team?
I mean, one, AG is at a point where we're not a startup per
True.
se anymore, but it's still very entrepreneurial and high growth. So that those pieces of it are still there. I would really struggle to bring
Mm,
someone into even this company that is at a much greater scale than most startups who had only been at huge companies. I would
interesting.
really struggle. But I can bridge that to your question, which is, so I don't know that I would onboard them, but I can tell you what I would want to see that would close the gap.
Yeah.
And again, never say never, but in
Fair enough.
general, in general, there is such a gap with people who have playbooks and bureaucracies, and their definition of speed is totally different.
Right.
Um, so, one, of course, I would look for the presence of having actually operated in high growth or truly hyper growth environments and ask questions and get stories about that. And maybe that's in there. That could help me get comfortable. What I would want to see is someone actually deeply working with a startup. Um, an early stage, super messy, entrepreneurial, figuring it out, obsessed with the customer, making mistakes, fixing them, having their life savings and their total life reputation riding on the thing they're doing. I would, if someone were said, I'm in a big company now, I'd like to work in a company like AG or even earlier stage. What should I do between now and then? I'd be like, go work with a startup, like volunteer your time, do whatever you can. That might be an advisor. It might mean be a board member. Just get some connection, invest, put your money behind a founder, and have the investor perspective, even if it's just as a minority angel. And that you need that whole view. What are the investors' view if it's not a fully bootstrapped company? What's the founder experience? What does that mid stage look like outside of just post revenue, early days, finding product market fit, actually getting into that, wow, we're doing tens of millions of revenue with, usually tens of employees,
Mhm.
and not hundreds, tens. And then they crack through that 100 million mark. And maybe that's not the metric that matters in a particular industry, but just using that as an example of scale milestones.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden, being able to start to divide functions and then realize you've got to let go some of the team members that are no longer right for. And when you're hyper growth, you have to do that a lot more often. When you're in a
Mhm.
big company, there's some companies that are so big, the way people talk inside the companies is no one ever leaves. They just find a spot for you. That is not the way when you can like count the
Yeah.
employees on your hands and toes. And when the needs of the business are changing so drastically. So the ability to rethink your own playbook, to have a growth mindset, to change, to challenge, to give away part of your job pretty often because it's time for someone else to step in. It's just a very different motor.
Mhm.
And so there's a way to build the muscle. And I encourage people to do it because there's so much opportunity for impact. There's so much upside. But it's not so easy as like, I've been with big companies, therefore I know what scale looks like. Therefore, it means I can help get you from where you are to where I'm used to being. There's a lot of mess in that middle, and not everyone can make the jump. Even I'm not perfect at it. I have days where I'm like, oh man, like I should have done that differently because this is different. And I'm lucky to have a partner like Chris, where Chris and I run the company together, where I get all that entrepreneurial, put everything on the line for years energy, and my energy are around scale, systems, culture, both of our energy. I mean, we are incredible partners for that reason. And I can see a lot of worlds where a founder and a big company number two or executive could have far more challenges than they have wins.
Yeah. It sounds like not only is the skill set really complementary, but hearing you um, talk about the company and the founder as well, you have a lot of respect, and I'm sure the respect is mutual. So I'm sure that's really important too.
Deep,
Super interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
deep respect.
Um,
Like so many companies die.
no,
Most
absolutely.
most companies die, and so to not die is amazing. And then to break through, and then be the leader, and then create a category.
Right.
Just you're getting into this very, very rarefied air
Yeah.
where it starts. A company like AG and a founder like Chris starts to get to the point where you're like, you're kind of doing something no one's ever done now.
Mhm.
And that is both magical and really hard because there's not a comp, there's not a template, there's not a playbook, and you're trying to figure out, how do I borrow from other companies and business models and maturity stages that help us make the best decisions, but not do that to the point that it doesn't make sense for how unique some elements of our business are. I have, it's beyond respect. It's like reverence, uh,
Amazing to
truly,
hear.
for the genius that that is the work.
Well, I know we have a few minutes left, but my next question was actually going to be, AG1 seems like a household brand now, and I know the New York Times even wrote an article literally titled "Athletic Greens Becomes a Household Name." And I actually am a huge fan of the product, but I think what strikes me from like a business perspective as being particularly amazing is there are so many kind of like nutrition or health focused brands out there, especially in D2C, that have tried kind of every form factor, et cetera, to kind of break out, and so much money that's gone into the space. And I'm just in awe that, to your point, Athletic Greens is broken out in this really meaningful way. I'm sure there are many factors, but from your experience now being in the company, what do you attribute that outside success to?
The product, it's just an amazing product. And you can look back at the business. Chris will say this himself. The business didn't always have really strong marketing, but what it had was a product that was highly effective and high quality. And then people who are really discerning started recommending it. And then some of those people became creators, back to your original, one of your early questions, and told the story of what an impact it's made for them. And AG1 was really leaned into the creator economy very early in supporting people who were creating platforms, on being a thought leader. And some of those happened to be thought leaders, and whether it was lifestyle or science or nutrition. And that was an incredible enabler of the growth of the business. But none of it would have happened without people feeling like they were far They were having a healthier experience. Their lives were improved. They developed other healthy habits. They were covering their nutritional bases. Their gut health was better. Their sleep was better. There are all these claims. There are all these experiences that people had because of the quality of the ingredients, the combination of the ingredients, the formulation. Chris has iterated that product 52 times. So he kept putting
Oh,
better
wow.
ingredients, not raising the price. Um, and so that quality and efficacy of the product um, is what led to all the referral and someone in a household recommending it to their family or their friends. And so there's a lot of word of mouth growth, and there still is today. Of course, we market very heavily, as we should, as a business who wants to make an impact on more people's lives. You got to invest to get in front of a lot of people. But it's still the product, because there were a lot of other things we did very poorly along the way. And
Oh.
yet, despite that, there was this incredible growth. So it's that amazing powder and the tasty drink it becomes in cold water first thing in the morning. And then the fact that that made it easy for people to stick with, and then they saw the health benefits.
Wow. If we had more time, I'd want to know about the things that didn't go as well. Because from the outside, it definitely seems like it's all been up to the right. I guess just to close out, I'm curious, like, what's next for Athletic Greens? You guys are obviously doing it exceptionally well. Is there expansion plans or new product lines, or is it just doubling down on the kind of marketing strategy that's worked really well? Would love to hear more about the
Just
5-10 year plan.
taking great care of our customers.
Mm,
That's it.
great.
We take really great care of our customers.
Amazing. Well, Kat, thank you so much for joining. This was incredible, and I learned a lot, and I really appreciate the time.
Yeah, likewise.